that pilots get fired because they're not holding the handrail, because they're not wearing a yellow vest, because they carry coffee on board the airplane without a lid on the cup. I'm going, what does anything of this have to do with getting my passengers alive to the next destination?
You're being told all the time to do something, and you think, well, why?
You look at a lot of the procedures and policies that we follow. Well, we don't follow them because they don't work, is particularly in this environment. It is the most chaotic, complex environment.
And so we are wasting 15% of our time doing something that is of no clinical value.
Because it came from National, why should they be telling us how to do our job and how to do it safely? And they didn't know what they were talking about because they'd never worked in store.
No good being told by upper management when, they've probably never had the tool in their hand.
Why? Why? Why are we doing this? It just makes them crazy. And we go crazy.
Safety Differently is a move away from bureaucracy and compliance as a means to control risk. It is an embrace of people's expertise, of the dignity of actual work, how it is done every day. And it's a story of innovation from the bottom up.
There's a general belief that as people move through the organisation, they get closer to the top of the organisation, and therefore they have more authority, more power. What we're saying is actually perhaps you're not the most important person in the organisation anymore. Perhaps there's somebody who may be organisationally a lot lower than you, but actually is the right person to take a decision on this or to solve this problem.
It's quite easy to dictate what you want. It's harder to sit back and listen and ask what needs to be done.
I think there's endless benefits in giving people as much autonomy as you can possibly give them.
Colleagues don't know, well, you can applaud, but no need yet. Who has seen the film? Wow, so I'm thinking, I'm writing a lot of books, but you don't read them. That's okay, I don't read them either, so that's, you're in good company. But I think, let's go make a film, and okay. There it is. You can watch it, it's free online because I crowdsourced it, so you don't have to read, you can watch. Okay. If you were having a good day until now, I'm gonna change that. But I'm having a great day. Imagine being called a hero by a 6-time astronaut. I mean, that's pretty cool. That is, that puts me right there. So, colleagues, I'm gonna change your day because I'm gonna tell you some things that are counterintuitive and perhaps undesirable to hear. But face the facts. That's the theme of the conference. Embrace the leadership. And so let's go face the facts. Don't believe a word I am telling you, but at least believe the facts. I'm gonna tell you 3 things. Well, probably some more, but 3 things at least. The first is, and this is the data speaking, the facts, the research showing that if you work on a site that has actively embraced a goal 0, the probability of you dying has gone up. Okay? There's hard data on this. If you work on a site, second point, that has more reported injuries and incidents, the chances of you dying go down dramatically. If you work on a site with no reported injuries or incidents, your chances of dying go up. So we're going to show you those data because it has some serious implications for what you want to do and what you don't want to do. Declaring a goal 0 seems to be a very dangerous and bad idea. I mean, there's world religions founded on this idea that we need to eradicate suffering from the universe, and I understand that. So it's a laudable goal and not very original. Maybe you think you invented it. No, you didn't. It's like thousands of years old. But it's not really working for us. So let's reconsider that as we look at the evidence, as we face the facts, as this conference wants us to do. The third point is this: responding retributively to bad news, to somebody violating your rule, your golden rule, your red rule, your life-saving rule, your whatever the color you give them. And responding to that by asking, who did that? How bad was that violation? And what should the consequences be? Is a wonderful way to push bad news underground. And I'm going to suggest an alternative to that. So this is your industry, right? When you look at the left graph, this is the proportion of compliance workers as a proportion of the working population. So 20 years ago, that was 5.7% of the working population was a compliance worker. So this would be an HSE superintendent, it would be a regulator, it would be an auditor, a compliance worker. Today, it's almost 10%, which means that it's probably more than 10% now. So 1 in 10 of you is watching what the other 9 are doing. You think, okay, you don't think that's funny. It probably isn't funny at all, actually. It's deeply disturbing. But now, the issue is, colleagues, if that were leading to a safer oil and gas industry, I wouldn't be standing here pontificating about this nonsense, that nonsense. But I am, because it isn't helping at all. If you look over the second half of that graph and the figures of fatalities in your industry, how is that working for us? Do you see that going down? I haven't yet. And so this is, of course, Einstein's definition of idiocy. Right? You keep doing the same thing and more of the same, expecting something different. That's idiocy, right? And so here we are. We still have a problem. You know what? Let's throw another 28 pages of bureaucracy against the problem. And it might just go overboard, right? So who are we deluding in this whole exercise? We're keeping a sizable portion of the workforce in their jobs, for sure, yes. But we're making life pretty damn miserable for another portion, which is where my heart lies. And it's costing us dearly. These are just the Australian figures that just came out. The compliance that I just showed you is costing that economy, right, which is 24 million people, 11 million in the workforce, 12 million. So translate that to Denmark, and you can downsize the figures, but it's probably the same. $250 billion a year. 60% of it, that's really interesting, is actually self-imposed. So 40% of all the compliance that you need to do is only from these 4 sad, lost regulator people somewhere in the room, right? 60% of it you make up. It's stuff you make up. You make that up. The regulator really doesn't care, right? Well, we can check that after the talk, or right now. Oh, well, I do care, right? Well, then look at the procedure. But so I don't think they do. You make this up. You tell your contractors to do this. You tell each other to do this. You hold each other accountable relative to these things. 60% you have made up. And 8 weeks of everybody working in this industry every year is wasted on this compliance. 8 weeks, 8 full-time weeks per worker. Do you really want to afford that? Again, if we're saving lives doing it, great, you won't hear me. But we're not. We're not. These seem to be the assumptions underneath safety traditionally. These people are the problem. They clearly don't know what to do. So we have to not only give them 104 steps, we have to give them 22 warnings because we are smart and they are dumb. And so we need to tell the dumb people to follow the rule at all times, even in 43 knot winds. And then at the end of the day, we count our success by the absence of bad stuff. If nothing bad happens, we say, oh, we are very safe. We hold each other accountable like this. You want the contract next year? How many first aids did you have? Well, how many would you like me to report? Right? So, which will it be, mon brave? We hold each other accountable for the absence of negative events. People at the very beginning of this journey, to throw that word back at you, were obviously colleagues of these guys. But here they are, walking out of a chemical plant in LaPorte, Texas, next to Jim's old hometown. And so 4 guys get killed in a gas release. So they have to walk out and talk to the media. Terrible day, absolutely awful. 2 of these guys are brothers. So there's a family in LaPorte that's got to bury 2 people, 2 of their sons, in a week. That's undescribable. Now, the irony of what we are doing, colleagues, is in this picture for everyone to see. Where's the irony? Because what are these people telling their workers as they come onto the plant? Please take extra precaution when driving and walking. Is that how anybody get killed? No. And so, this zealous obsession with low numbers of negatives down to a religiously committed 0 is killing people. And I'm going to put numbers under that claim. And here's how. Because obviously, and if we didn't know it yet, then since Macondo, we certainly do, it's easy to say, as colleagues of mine do, that there is no correlation whatsoever between personal hard hat safety, slips, trips, falls, and blowing the thing up, process safety. There is no correlation. That it is a fool's errand to try to prevent one and think you prevent the other. Fully agree to an extent, because there is actually a correlation, but it's inverted. That's what I'm going to show you. Let's face those facts. So here's the first piece from Chirat and Dainty in the UK. I'm going to underline the sentence that really matters here. This reveals that working on a project subject to a zero safety policy or program actually appears to slightly increase the likelihood of having a serious life-changing accident or fatality. Working on a site that has declared 0 exposes you to fatal risk more. Face the facts, gang. If you do anything after today, then make that commitment. Don't take my word for it. This is not even my research. Yeah, I get you the paper if you want to look at it, but let's face those facts. Let me give you some summary of the findings so far. What we see is that higher reported injury and incident rates are strongly correlated with a reduction in fatalities. Did you get that? And vice versa. And when I say strongly correlated, I mean strongly correlated. Minus 0.82, minus 0.83. That's very strong, but it's inverted, but it's very strong. As you probably know, how people get injured is not how they get killed. Right? They die in ways that don't typically get them injured, and that's true for this industry as well. Interestingly, and this is critical, and this is where audits really don't pick up the interesting things, right? 174 audits last year on that platform that I just flew off of on Tuesday. 174 audits, 17 findings out of 174 audits. That's bang for the buck, dude. That's serious value for money. That's like an order of magnitude fewer findings than you did audits. What did you find? Oh, we found a fire extinguisher that was slightly skewed. Right. And so it's cute, and but it's a lullaby, right? We sing this as a lullaby to put ourselves to sleep that everything is under control, because we count what we can count, but we don't count what counts. That's us. And so when you look at the investigation after investigation after investigation into death, into fatalities, what's interesting is that death doesn't follow on failures. Death hides in success. What we're beginning to understand is that if you want to follow where a fatality is going to happen, your audit should trace where work is successful, despite the fact that it's really hard. What you want to ask is, how did you guys complete that job on time? How did that happen? Oh, let me show you. That's what you should be auditing. Then you can have some predictive capacity for how people might die, because that's the interesting story. If these are the facts, let me give you some numbers underneath them, lots of numbers. These are Finnish numbers, right? So we're dealing from all over the world. So I'm going to talk about the fatality and the incidents. They call it accidents. Incidents if you look at the classification. So incidents versus fatalities. Now, let's take a theory from 1931, which is based itself, by the way, on deeply fraudulent data from an insurance salesman who wasn't a scientist at all, whose method description was 4 lines long. Wouldn't stand peer review today, or then for that matter. But yet there was a scientific approach to accident prevention. Never mind. Of course, I'm talking about Heinrich. So this is what the theory predicts. And some of you still believe it does. If you do, you're going to be in for a surprise. Even if you didn't, you're still going to be in for a surprise. The numbers are utterly irrelevant. For me, it's a dime a dozen because the whole idea is false and fraudulent. But this is what it would suggest. For 10 smaller ones, you get 1 big one. All right? Well, if that's the case, then the data that we just saw, this data, should look like this if you correlate one with the other. If you do a regression analysis, right? Let's do some statistics on this, and you see this is how the theory predicts it would look. All right? For 10 smaller ones, you get 1 big one. Are you with me? That's relatively easy to follow, right? That's pretty linear. What does the data say? That's the data. That is the fact. If you want to face the facts, then begin to bend your head around this cultural story that if you have more reported injuries and incidents on your rig, your chances of killing people actually go down. If you got fewer reported injuries and incidents on your rig, your chances of killing someone have just gone up. Now, who is not getting this? How much clearer can I be? What about bad news? So, this is my definition of a safety culture. It's a culture that allows the boss to hear bad news. You might remember that. Just an example from driving commercial jets. And I don't want to be imperialist, but there's an interesting lesson in here. Lots of complicated statistics. All right, this is MIT, Barnett and Wong, colleagues over there, who did this work, and they find that the airline with more incidents has a lower passenger mortality risk. So an airline with a lot of incidents is a safer one. Remember we had this discussion this morning with Jim. Well, just check how many incidents they had last year. 300? Oh, that's good. I'll get on board. Right? At least I'll survive. The story, colleagues, is a cultural one. The story is one of leadership, of safety leadership, of being willing and open and able to get that bad news, to have that conversation, to learn from it, to not stand in judgment, to not have rules hanging over people that might get them fired if they speak up about something, to not penalize a contractor because they had 12 first aids versus the other one that had 7 last year. That's a sure way to make stuff go away. Evidence of stuff go away. So, all right, let's shift focus to the last study I wanted to talk about, which is this one. So this is one of ours. This is in a hospital, really dangerous place. Actually, the numbers are above statistical noise levels there, quite. So, and this is a pretty good hospital. Only 1 in 13 patients get hurt by the process of receiving care. That's pretty good. That's actually not bad. 7%. All right, so again, that's within a band in which we can actually do meaningful statistical analysis with you. And so 1 in 13 gets hurt. And the hospital says, oh, but we're really proud of our incident investigations, and we find this out, and we do lots of work, and we do the analysis, and then we find out what happened. And I said, well, what are some of the patterns that you find? Oh, let me tell you about that. We find human errors. We find guidelines that are not followed. We find communication failures. We find miscalculations. We find procedural violations. Just bear that one in mind for a second. American colleagues did a study on anesthesia. If you're an anesthesiologist, anesthetist, you put people to sleep for surgery and manage pain, things like that. Do you know how long it would take for an anesthesiologist to read all the rules and guidelines and protocols and procedures applicable to their work in the operating theater? Suppose that she reads 8 hours a day. How long would she be reading? 3 days. Okay, good. Going once, going twice. I think you have to increase the count a little bit. The anesthesiologist would be reading 2,000 years. I'm not making this up. I have the study on my computer. 2,000 years of reading. Christ wasn't even a carpenter yet. Right? And you're already reading. Oh, I want to be an anesthesiologist in 2018. I got to start reading. It's literally madness. What are we? But you're pretty good at it too, by the way. You're getting there. You're getting there. Not quite 2,000 years yet, though. I don't think the study has been done. But what an interesting research question that would be. But the most interesting part, colleagues, is actually the following. So, in the one that goes wrong, this is what we find. Okay. Utterly trivial and deeply uninteresting. These are just labels to put on something. But then we asked a very Eric Holnagelian question, right? So Eric would ask, what about the other 12? The 12 that go right. Why do they go right? Have you ever asked yourself that question? And they look at us as if we're going, no. And so we ask the question, why do they go right? Well, how do you find out? You don't have a trigger, right? You can't go in and do an investigation. Well, you actually can't do an investigation of things that go right, by the way, and it just suggests that we should to understand how they can go terribly wrong at some point. But we went native for weeks in this hospital. And you know what we find when things go right? Remember that list? Human errors, guidelines not followed, communication failures, miscalculations, procedural violations. There is no difference. Not here, there is no difference. This is not what distinguishes the one that goes wrong from the 12 that go right. This is not what makes the difference. What makes the difference? Remember Eric's point. Safety differently, or safety two as he calls it, is not about stopping the things that can go wrong from going wrong. That's for people to do. You don't need to figure that out. Professionals will probably do that for you because they're right there. Safety differently, safety two, is about finding the capacities and features that make things go right, and then taking the leadership to enhance those capacities and the conditions that give rise to them. That sounded important. Does that make sense? Don't focus and obsess with stopping things from going wrong. Focus on what has to go right and enhance the capacities that make it so. And that's true for the findings here, because we did find interesting differences. In the 12 that go right, you know what we find? We find it's not in what people aren't doing, it is in what they are doing. And this goes back to some of the things that Jim has in fact perfected to an algorithm, to a science, a science would be a lot said, but to a program, nice. And we talked about this, in fact, Patrick Julie in his discussion, right? The ability to say stop, to intervene. Not taking past success as a guarantee of future safety. Keeping that discussion about risk alive, even when everything looks safe. And interestingly, a diversity of opinion and in particularly dissent, right? We find this all over the place, right? The HRO people, the book you mentioned, right? Full of these sorts of findings. So this is rather consistent with where the science is taking us. If you want to stop things from going wrong, enhance the capacities that make things go right. That's what you should be focusing on as a safety leader, not on obsessing, stopping things from going wrong, but enhancing the capacities that make things go right. This list is not exhaustive. Your people may possess lots of capacities and features that are rather unique for the setting or their profession that help make things go right. What's behind that is a flip of the model that we just looked at. Rather than people being the problem to control, people are your problem solvers. They are the solution. They're not the problem to control. Rather than telling them what to do in 28 pages and 104 steps and 22 warnings, ask them what they need. What do you need to be successful? What do you need from me? Again, you're right, the Sandusky colleague of yours, Jim, eminent, gorgeous example, right? Requirements, second one was resources and then readiness, exactly. That discussion, right? It's not about stopping things from going wrong, it's about enhancing and finding the capacities to make it go right. Exactly. These are the steps to take. First are decentralizing, away from headquarters, away from the beach to the rig, And then once it gets there, devolve. Devolve doesn't mean getting rid of Scotland. Devolve means, that's not funny here, okay. You did find it, but you're not Scottish. Oh, you, so he would find it funny. There you go. Thank you. Devolution, devolving, means pushing decision authority down to the lowest level it will go, right? So push it down. Right? Decentralize away from the center, then down to the lowest level you can afford, and then declutter. Take your leaf blower and get rid of your 28 pages. All right? That would be a very simple recipe. If you watch the film, you will see that there is carefully well-managed experiments in which you can actually do this, in which Origin in the film did it, in which Woolworths and Queensland Health did this. Micro-experiments which are safe to fail, in which you can discover what works, what doesn't work, and what is really the madness that clutters people's lives and daily work, so that you can get rid of that, clean it out, make it fit for purpose for the job. I think I'll get back to that. If you're a boss, you hear bad news. What's the typical response that I've seen in your industry? It's these questions. Which rule has been broken? Who did it? How bad was that breach? And thus, what should the consequences be? After a lot of work, one organization has gone to a restorative model and asks very different questions. If you find a breach, ask this. Who is hurt? Or who could have been hurt? What are their needs? Whose obligation is it to meet those needs? And how do we involve the community in solving that? It leads to a very different conversation, very different discussion, very different repertoire of post-conditions and responses, and a much greater willingness to keep talking rather than pushing evidence of bad news underground, which is typically what you get with the first response.
Our core in Merseycare is behavioural health, from core talking therapies right through to one of 3 high secure mental health hospitals.
It's challenging, busy, quite often dangerous.
Patients thought things were crawling all over them.
People don't really understand them. What I've done is try and help to make that better.
Coming into the health sector, you have to recognise how things work.
I was involved in a recent incident where I'd made a mistake.
The sort of the management culture was quite an intimidating kind of bullying management system.
It's really easy when you're in our jobs to ask, I wonder who was at the back of that.
You looked at the data on a piece of paper, you looked at the numbers as numbers, and you go into a clinical environment and those numbers become people.
I was informed that there was allegations made against me.
And HR's response was, you're actually under investigation. That was the first I knew of it.
I wasn't sort of ready and expecting the response from the trust to suspend the staff.
The day I was suspended was the worst day of my working life.
So there's really 2 ways in which you can do just culture. Right? One would be a retributive way. You ask questions like, what rule is broken and what should the consequences be? And it's all focused on the individual who's the supposed offender.
The staff felt proven guilty without trial.
You question your professionalism, everything you've learned, everything you've got.
It's just the most horrendous time of my life and my family's life.
It is a political system. It's target driven.
Well, there were 3 deaths, 3 separate wards, no real correlation or link between any of them.
But we got to a point that we thought we've got to change the way we do this.
And of course, naturally, we scratch our heads and say, but we don't have a blame culture.
The real challenge is that you cannot buy a just culture off the shelf. It doesn't work that way. Creating a just, restorative culture is a hard and long slog.
You could go back and then say, well, Dekker, that's really cute, but what about accountability? All right, what about accountability? You can see accountability as 2 very, very different things. On the one hand, you can see accountability as something that you have to settle. You settle your account, you pay your account. You screwed it up, now you have to pay your account by going away or being sanctioned in some way. And it's all about backward-looking accountability. You're looking, as Ginny Sharp beautifully puts it, you look back on the event rather than what needs to be done from here on. And it's all about who is responsible. You can think about accountability in a forward-looking way. and say accountability and an account is not something you settle or pay. It is something you tell. It is something you share. You share your account. You tell your account. But how willing are people to do that under a regime of sanctionable rule violations? How willing are people to do that if they get held up against their peers towards some zero goal that they're screwing up because they just have only 0 or 1 days since the last injury versus 760 on the neighboring rig? How willing are people to engage in that sort of accountability in your organization? Do they tell their accounts? It's about forward-looking accountability. What do we need to do now? Remember the questions. Whose obligation is to meet the needs that result from this hurt? Well, there's needs. We need to do something in our organization. Who has that obligation? How do we divide that accountability going forward rather than looking backward? It's about asking what is responsible, not who is responsible. This is all within your power. Nobody really is telling you to be retributive, unless your organization has committed to these things that makes it difficult. But still, out there, you can create your own culture that allows and empowers certain things over others. Now, when it comes to leadership, given that that's a goal of this meeting, this is what I heard today. I've heard that we should be humble. We should admit our own fallibility. Right, Jim? We can't say, I know all the answers. We have to understand work as done, because otherwise, what are you leading if you don't understand that? We have to find out why things go right, not wrong. We have to do anything we can that's in our power to reduce that downward pressure on honesty, openness, and disclosure. Whether the policy is called Goal Zero or Golden Rules, all of that might exercise downward pressure on openness and honesty in the conversation in your company. As a leader, you have the ethical responsibility, not the bureaucratic accountability, but the ethical responsibility to remove or reduce that pressure on your watch. Empower lower status people, show compassion. And I think I want to add one really important question that I think you should ask every day. What's the stupidest thing that we are asking you to work here today? You'd be surprised at the really interesting results you might get. Ask that question, and you'll get a sense of how work actually gets done. You'll get a sense of the pride of workmanship, of what it takes to get stuff done on your rig. If you want to see the film, go there and you'll see the film. I am done. We can now go to the conversation. Monica, can I invite you? Alan, where are you? Good. Thank you.